Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, alhamdulillah, wassalatu wassalamu ala Sayyidina Rasulillah wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa man wala. So today inshallah we want to talk about the internet and purchasing things digitally, purchasing things over the internet. Of course, when we read in the classical books of fiqh and we talk about a basic, boilerplate transaction, there's the majlis, there's the place of the majlis ul-aqd, there's the place where the transaction takes place, probably two people over a table. There's the offer and the accepting of the offer, the ijab, the qabul, they shake hands or they recite the Fatiha or tawakkalna Allah or something like that, and the transaction takes place. You take your goods, you exchange the money. Okay, well, that's not how transactions take place in the real world, except very rarely. So the problem, not the problem, but the issue we want to discuss is that now we have a digital space. And when it comes to transactions, and when it comes to the accepting of the transaction and the conditions, and when it comes to determining what is the majlis, what is the table of the contract, let's say, all of that's going to be determined by the urf. And people in different, even in the classical books of fiqh, people from different parts of the Muslim world, people from different cultures, people from different backgrounds, they have a different way. In real estate deals, for example, if you're renting a place or buying a place, you do all of this paperwork, at a table or at an office somewhere, and then somebody hands you the keys and says, congratulations. That would be, in the urf of today, that would be the moment that you take possession of that property or that ayn, that property, in that case. Or you get into a taxi cab, for example. When there used to be sort of cash and there was like a meter, you get into the cab, you tell the cab, take me to Main Street, and then the cabbie, puts the meter stick down. I don't even think they have them. I'm dating myself. That means you've accepted those terms, and he's accepted your offer or your request. He's taking you to the place, whatever's on the meter, you're going to pay. Sometimes all of that happens without you saying anything, but the urf, the custom is that that's an accepted way of transacting in that service, in that example. So today we want to talk about the internet. What does the internet mean? What does buying products or services on the internet mean? And how do we interpret the classical conditions into this modern space? We'll begin the discussion in the next clip, inshallah. Okay, like some of the lectures I've been asked to teach you in this module, I think this is a little pedestrian to spend 10 minutes explaining to you what the internet is, but I will comply, and maybe we'll find something interesting to share with one another. One of the interesting things to remind ourselves is that the internet actually goes back to the late 1960s. And this was something that was developed in the United States, so this is an American invention, and it's an invention that was developed through the State Department, through the Defense Department, to help, in the 50s, 60s, and 70s, a huge growth of American power and military might and strength, and bases all over the world, coming sort of out of World War II, entering into this quagmire that became known as Vietnam, and the kind of obsession about data and data-driven warfare, and this was something that was very much in vogue at the time, and still remains so, that let us wage war through data, and let us compute the data, and let us be able to determine how much we're spending, how much we're expending, how much material do we have. All of those kind of things came hand in hand with the need to have a technology that allows us to compute all of that and to be able to send all of those things across. So that's a little kind of easy, a nice little factoid, that's something that is to remind ourselves with. However, when we say the internet, it's not something that really took off until the very late 80s and definitely into the 90s. I remember when I went to college for the first time, that was the first time that I had email. We were required to have email so that the professors can communicate with us, but I remember I would have to go to the common place to check my email. It wasn't even something that I needed to check all the time. It was like your mailbox. You just check it once a day. It was enough. Obviously now is not the case. So this is something that, it started off slowly and it just kind of picked up big time. And now, like all of the things we've been talking about with banking and credit cards, it's impossible not to be on the internet. As a matter of fact, this entire course is on the internet, and you are consuming this using the internet, and we are verifying your applications, and you're processing your payments and verifying your attendance and your grading, and then issuing you, inshallah, at the end of this journey, a certificate based on the internet. So obviously, we are saying that the internet is permissible to use, of course, and that these can represent legal transactions according to the Sharia. Now, other than information, the internet really is a way of commerce now. If we've talked about the rise of banking, the rise of the banking system, and then we talked about the rise of fiat currency, and then the need for the institutions, the banking institutions, to regulate the fiat currency, which means that there's a rise of digital currency and the digitization of finance. Well, that can't take place except if it's through the internet. So all of these things go together. And just like it's impossible to live in the modern world without having a bank account, and I understand that some people don't and many people don't, but even those people are still dealing with digital currency because there are transfers and Western Union type of hawalas or something like that. I mean, that's all digital when you think about it. So I stand by that statement. And it's impossible not to have cards and to pay with cards, and the use of cash is less and less and less. All of that is necessitated by the internet. If you're going to the ATM machine, where the ATM machine is communicating with the central bank, with your bank account, through the internet. It's wired in, but it's through the digital communication. So digital communication is an accepted type of communication in the modern world, and the Sharia will therefore look at that and ask the question, well, is this something that is accepted in the modern world as a way of conducting business or not? And this is a section of Islamic law in which urf, in which custom is very much an important thing. So the internet, there are like kind of three buckets of the internet, I guess. One thing is information. So people that consume news or information, social media, kind of in the information space. Another space is entertainment. So people use the internet for entertainment, whether it's to stream videos or play games over the internet that are much more sophisticated now. And then the third big thing is commerce, and that's what we're focusing on in this lecture, which is that using the internet to buy things. Almost everything we buy now is, not everything, but many things we buy is through the internet. Even groceries now. I remember during COVID, that was a huge rise of buying groceries online when people didn't want to go to the stores anymore, and we wanted to lessen the foot traffic to the grocery stores. People were ordering, whether you order food online, whether you buy groceries online, you can buy books online, you can pay for your education online, so on and so forth. So the exchange, we're not going to look at those individual types of transaction. We're going to abstract a little bit and just ask the question, if we have online commerce, what does Islamic law say about online commerce? And then we remind ourselves of the basic conditions of a valid trade, is that there has to be an offer and an accepting of the offer. That which is being provided has to be stipulated. Either it's described, like the salam transaction, which is kind of the equivalent today would be like a catalog, purchasing through a catalog. So you're like looking literally through, when I was growing up, you'd actually look through a catalog and see the picture, and then you go to the store and you actually find the actual item or you order it. Or it's a service and the stipulations of the service. So there has to be the thing that you're transacting over has to be clear. There has to be an offer and an accepting the offer, and there's the exchange of the money in exchange for the good at the time of the transaction. And as I said in the introductory clip, what determines those details is al-urf, is custom. I gave you the example of the taxi. The reason I gave you that example is I remember when I was a student, some nincompoop, I can't remember who he was, was coming around saying in Egypt, he was saying, he wasn't Egyptian, but he was criticizing, he was like, oh, in Egypt, all of these taxi cab transactions are haram because there's no ijab and qubul. I'm like, yeah, it is ijab and qubul because it's determined by urf. You don't walk into the cab, أريد الذهاب إلى الشارع الفلاني, and then so on and so forth. It doesn't have to be like that. That's what's written in the books to teach you that this is what the formal boilerplate type of transaction is. But if I Sometimes, by the way, let me just take one step further. Sometimes I myself, in an Arab world, I would go to a bookstore because that's my main. Obviously, you can see that's my main purchase, my main concern, more than food or anything. Alhamdulillah Rabbil Alameen. Our mashayikh used to say, "Ubtulina bimarad al-kutub." We have been afflicted with the disease of books. As a happy thing, we're happy that Alhamdulillah we're in that. Anyway, you can go to the bookstore, buy a book, take a book off a shelf, buy it without even saying anything to the man. Because it's known that in this shop, the price, for example, is on the book. Or I'll ask the guy, how much is this? He says it's 50 pounds, or 100 pounds, or 50 or 20 dinars, or whatever the currency may be. And I'd be like, And I give him the money and I take the book. Now that means that I've accepted his offer, I've accepted the price. Or I haggle. I was like, come on, I need to buy like 5 books. Can you cut me a deal? He's like, okay, now give me the books. And he takes out his calculator, and then he'll just like show me the calculator like this. Sometimes he won't even say anything. He'll show me the price. And I'll be like, okay, here's the money. It means I've accepted that. So in the issue of ijab and qubul, in offering and accepting the offer in a transaction, it is in the classical fiqh determined by the urf. I don't want you to think that there's a sunnah way of buying and selling and you have to be so formal, and that there's, and we've somehow slipped away from that. We haven't. It's all determined by urf, because people that trade, people that are in the market, and different sectors, different countries, different markets have their own urf. Sometimes, like in the stock market, they do like gestures, hand gestures. Well, if you do those hand gestures and you know those, to me it looks funny, but if you know what it is, then that's an example of ijab and qubul. So when we come to ask ourselves, are the transactions on the internet permissible and consider Sharia compliant, that's what we're going to look at. We're not going to look at, is it saying what the books say. We're going to take the theory of what the books say and say, do we see that in the modern transaction? And of course, we're going to end up saying, yes, we see them. That's my job in this clip, is to show you that. But I wanted to give you some of the rhyme and reason behind it. Like the credit card and some of the other modern transactions, in the internet transaction, there's going to be an amalgamation of several Sharia transactions, like al-wakala, like as-salam, so on and so forth, because those microtransactions that we study don't have to happen in a silo. They can happen, all of them together, as we will show, and inshallah we'll pick up this discussion in the next clip. Okay, the main thing is, for our purposes in this lecture, the main thing is the form of communication online. Does that constitute a Sharia compliant transaction? That's the main issue. So what in the Sharia constitutes confirmation of the trade? Do I have to be there myself? Can I send somebody in my stead? Can I write a document? If I can write a document now in the modern world, can the document be an electronic document? Could it be a message that I send you through my phone, like a text message or a WhatsApp or Telegram or something like that? Those are the issues that we want to find out, because the basic structure of the transaction is that it has to be that you have accepted the offer, or made the offer, and you have accepted my offer. In the books of fiqh, so the thread that we're going to pick up from the books of fiqh, the classical books, al-fiqh al-mawruth, the inherited fiqh, is the issue of the written format as being permissible. And basically the madhahib, like the Hanafis, I think the Shafi'is and the Hanbalis, I don't know why they didn't write the Malikis, I'm assuming the Malikis as well, accept the writing to be a legitimate form of communication that becomes binding. So I could send a servant, this is the classical example, a servant and or a slave of mine, and forgive the example of slavery, and my comments on that. Sorry, my microphone just kind of slipped off my throat here. My comments on that, and you know that this person works for me, or let's use a more modern example, my assistant. I send an assistant or employee from my office with a letter that has my handwriting, or the letter is typed in the modern world, and it has my signature and or stamp and or seal or embossing. And those things still exist till today. In the United States, where I'm familiar of doing business, it's very common when you register for a business, in the mail you'll get like an embossing thing that you put on the paper and you stamp it, and that's like a formal seal. It's called the seal of the company, and you can order them. And it's very popular that people like me that collect books or have books, I don't have this, but you can emboss on the beginning cover of the book your seal. And when I was in Princeton, very often you'd find books that were donated by alumni or other libraries. You will open the book, they'll be old, like from the 1920s, 30s, some of them from the 1800s. They'll have a stamp, that embossing seal that still lasts to today and impresses, and that's an accepted form of an official document or a stamp. In the Arab world, we love stamps. They call it, khitm al-nisr, the stamp of the eagle of the dawla. Or in the West, it could be like a notary stamp that's stamped like one of those stamps that you like kind of press down, and it will be signed in. All of those things are accepted forms of an official letter. So if you see somebody, my assistant or an employee from my office, they come with a letter, it's typed, and it has my signature on it, automatically you're going to accept this as official. How do you know that this is official? Well, what happens if you have to go to court and you're going to take this? Will the judge accept this into evidence or not? That's how you can answer the question, is if it's official. So in the books of fiqh, they say you can't write on water and on the sky. So I can't go like this and write, and then this is an accepted form of, even though in language, from the linguistic definition, this is a form of kalam. Kalamu fil hawa, kalamu al ma', to write on the sky, air, or to write on the water. And I whispered like that, from a linguistic point of view, we would say that's kalam. But urfan, in the urf, and customarily, we don't accept that as communication, right? When you go to court, we're using the court as an example, the judge will say, speak up, or in modern courts, there's a microphone, because everyone has to hear, including the judge and the stenographer, the person that's typing away the proceedings of the court. So all of these shows you that this is the thread that we're picking up from the traditional books of the Hanafis, the Shafi'is, and the Hanbalis, radiyallahu anhum ajma'in, that as long as the writing lasts, meaning that the ink is on the paper and it's not like on I don't have anything next to me, but like let's say I have a notebook here next to me. So let's say I open my notebook and I tore out a piece of paper, and the way that the paper is threaded together, it doesn't tear straight, so it's like jagged. It's a little thing, and I write a note and I give it to you. Okay, you're not going to accept that as official, even if you recognize my handwriting, even if you recognize my official. Be like, they'll say, I need something more official than this. It's even a common thing in expression in English. So that wouldn't be accepted. So the Hanafis say something like that's not accepted. The Shafi'is are a little bit more broad. If it came from you, then it's binding. Just like if you told your slave you are free and you were joking, the slave is free. Just like if you told your wife you are divorced and you were joking, the divorce counts. Because the words the Shafi'is say is very, prima facie. If you said it, whether you were joking or not, it counts. So don't fool around with divorce. Don't fool around with manumission. Don't fool around with trade. That's kind of the thinking or the rhyme and the reason behind the Shafi'i philosophy of the spoken word and the transactions. And the Hanafis are a little bit more restrictive. That like example I gave you, that won't count. You can't just tear off a piece of paper. That's a small detail. The point of view is that there is a common urf that the Sharia accepts somebody that you have sent to represent you. Like I said, an employee, a child, you sent your son or your daughter, your wife, a relative, personal assistant, in the classical books, a slave, that everyone knows that you own that slave, etc. It accepts written form. So when we talk about transaction in business, in commerce, in trade, it doesn't have to be verbal. That's the point I'm trying to get across. If it doesn't have to be verbal and it can be written, then when we come to the online space, in the modern world, well, that's a form of written. But it has to be written in a way that can be attached to you. So whatever is written has to be attached to your person in a way that we say is quote unquote official. So if I went to court, and the way that you can ask these questions, as I just said a minute ago, is you can ask yourself, well, what would happen if you went to court and you were trying to produce evidence in the modern world? So if I came to court and I had your phone and I showed in the notes app you wrote something, that's one thing. But if I show the judge that you sent me a message from your phone, an SMS or a WhatsApp or whatever, that means something else. So the notes app, you don't know what the intention is. You don't know who typed that necessarily. It could have been copy and pasted from something online, or it could just been a passing thought. It could be I'm frustrated, so I'm typing out my frustration. But if I go through the effort of writing a message that's addressed to you from my phone and it's sent to you, that's an official, in the modern world we see that as an official type of communication, which is why data, cell phone data, SMS, WhatsApp, social media posts are considered evidence because it's something that's attached to you. So if the courts see that as official, that means the modern urf of today, the modern custom of today, accepts that as an official way of communication. But not like a drafted email that I never sent. That would be like kind of like, well, they didn't send it, or he wrote a draft in the email, but he didn't even put who it's sent to, for example. That's, different. I mean, that's not going to be accepted. So we carry that same thinking with the philosophy that we have from Islamic law and in the modern world, and we really find that it's very much the same thing. When you look at what the Hanafi said, what the Shafi'i said, what the Hanbali said, and the Maliki said about writing. I mean, the Shafi'is, for example, they allow writing on a notebook, on bones, on a lawh, like a tablet of wood, writing on stones, but not writing on the water and the sky and the air. So the Shafi'is are a little bit more liberal when it comes to that, as I mentioned. In the modern world, we're going to be more like the Hanafis, and we're going to say it's got to be semi-official. You can't take that like little piece of paper from the notebook and say, oh, judge, he left me all of his wealth on his deathbed and here's the proof. That's it's a little too dubious. You need something a lot more official than that. Those are some of the threads that we have in the classical fiqh that help us understand how we opine on similar transactions in the modern fiqh and allow us to conclude that yes, if I buy something online and I go through the different, pages and I put in my credit card information, my personal information, my shipping, and I'm pressing OK, if I get like a code on my phone that I therefore have to type that code back in for verification, all of that's going to be considered official communication and it's going to carry weight when it comes to the transaction. And we'll conclude this discussion in the next clip, inshallah. So we've talked a little bit about the internet and how the online space really is very much totally encompassing us. If you don't understand how encompassing the internet is, go home today or tomorrow and turn off your internet connection for the day and see what happens. And don't use your phone for a day. You will fall within, I believe, half an hour. I mean, that's how much it's a part of our life. It's sometimes it's even more important than food and water because it's like that's the only way we can get around, that we can buy things. So I hope that you understand how serious this is. I mean, it really is a part of our, whether it's good or bad, it is the fact of life. Okay, so we talked a little bit about the internet. Everything we're doing now is online, including these courses and this entire program. And we talked about the Sharia allowing for non-verbal forms of communication to be official. So non-verbal forms of communication, where are you going to find those discussions in classical fiqh? You're going to find them in the discussion of the basic structure of al-bay', the trade, the ijab and the qubul, the offer, accepting the offer. You'll find them in the sections of marriage and divorce. What can you divorce your wife through a letter or not? Is it kinaya or is it sarih? And then also in the section of manumission, al-itq, when people can manumit their slaves. So you'll find all of those discussions, that's where you find them. So when you bring them out and put those statements, on one sheet of paper or two sheets of paper, you kind of conclude, okay, the Sharia and the different madhahib, with varying degrees of strictness and liberalness, allow nonverbal communication. That's the important thing. And that's what we need to know to be able to say, well, what happens online? What happens online is it's nonverbal communication. Now the Sharia allows nonverbal communication as to be official if the nonverbal communication is official. That part is shared by all of the madhahib. So they're just differences of interpretation of what allows for nonverbal communication. In the modern world, we have a basic barrier. A lot of times what we have when we do things online, especially when we're buying something, whether it's a service or whether it's a product, they will oftentimes send you a verification code to verify that it's you. Or if you have to make an account and then you have to log on to the account, and then to log on to the account the first time you have to, or if it's a new browser, or if you go to a new region, you open up the account from another browser, they'll send you a verification code. The fact that you have verified your connection, that counts in the modern world as official. If you have gone through those steps, then your act of purchasing or your act of offering to sell something, like you're selling something on eBay or something like that, that's official. And then that becomes binding if somebody buys it or if you buy it and you transact money, and then all of the fiqh that follows from that about having to exchange the money, having the right to rescind the transaction, having the right to return it for damages, it's all the things that we talked about fall into place. So when you think about modern transactions, and the reason this course is important is because it's one of these times where we're going to take the theory and apply it to modern situations. The first thing you need to do is you need to suspend, this is kind of from me, I'm kind of going off script here. You need to suspend for a moment the fiqh and only look at the modern transaction to make sure that you are understanding the modern transaction on its own terms, unbiased by what you might think instinctively the Sharia is opining. That's very important and also very difficult because of our love of the deen and our as we should, and our deep desire to follow the Quran and Sunnah of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Of course, sometimes it's hard to do that because you're like, nah, haram, no, this, you're quickly, but what you're doing is you're allowing the bias to seek in. The correct way to do it is you have to look at the transaction first, which is why in the order of this lecture, I started off by saying, what is the internet? Even though I said it's a little bit pedestrian. Well, let's talk about what is the internet so we understand and remind ourselves what's happening. Okay, when we come to buy things on it, we're not talking about entertainment and information and social media. We're talking about commerce. When I buy something, how are things bought and sold on the internet? When you start to answer that question, you realize that pictures have to be taken, verification has to be made, there are terms and conditions that you have to abide. Like if you're selling, I haven't sold something on eBay. I bought things from eBay, but I know that there are some sellers that are verified. I trust that seller because I trust the eBay system. But if the seller is, sometimes the picture looks too good or too generic. I'm like, that doesn't look like something from the 1930s. That looks like something you just drew on AI or something. I won't buy it. There are terms and conditions. So forget about the Sharia for just a moment and look at that modern transaction. There's the verification code. Okay, why do we have to send a verification code to verify your connection? What does the connection mean? What is the your address, your internet address? Okay, that verifies your location. Okay, there's a connection. That means that there's a utility that's providing the connection. What happens if we go to court? What can be used as evidence? And I told about the email draft or the notes versus an SMS that was sent. You start asking all of these questions, excuse me, to understand the transaction on its own terms. Okay. Then after that you say, what are the basic structures of the Sharia transaction? And that's also important to abstract a little bit because a lot of the classical fiqh, people get caught up with the examples and they forget about the theory behind the law. The basic, and in our madhab at least, it's very clear when we read the Matn of Abi Shuja and its commentaries and glosses, every point of law has arkan and shurut, integrals and conditions. So what are the conditions of that there's an offer, that you accept the offer, that you're not coerced, that allow nonverbal communication. Okay, that's the second layer. And then the third layer is putting those two things together. Each one of these things is where people can go wrong and where mistakes are made. So if somebody came and say the internet is haram, if they just said it like that, then know that something's gone wrong in their thinking. It's just that statement is so wrong on so many levels because everything is online. The whole government is run online. And sometimes we're just not aware of that. Anyway, so we understand that there's this modern transaction. The transactions are taking place on the internet, and we understand that there are many hoops, not many, but there are some hoops that you have to go through to verify your identity and your willingness to buy the thing. Even still, if somebody stole your identity and bought something, it happens to us all the time, you can report to the credit card that you didn't buy this, you can prove, you can dispute. Identity theft happens all the time, and it's a form of theft, and therefore your money is returned to you, and you have consumer protection. That's why we talked about consumer protection when it came to some of the credit cards. And now an extension of this discussion is using this device to buy things, the phone. So now we're even beyond the internet, where we're just buying things from our phone. And the phone, it seems to me, at least at the time of this recording in 2024, is the issue of how things are verified. The code of verification comes to your phone. You log on with your phone, facial recognition, so on and so forth. It's almost like if you don't have a phone number somewhere, it's almost impossible to buy things online, or it makes it more difficult to buy things online. I guess you need a phone and or an email address is another way of verification. So therefore, if I speak to somebody on the phone, can I authorize the payment? Well, that's a verbal authorization. The Sharia accepts that. If I send a message to somebody, a book, for me, I have a lot of booksellers. I like to use books as an example. I have a lot of booksellers that I deal with when I need to find something, and I'll send them a WhatsApp. Do you have, Assalamu alaikum, do you have such and such book? Do you have like Al by Imam Shafi'i, this edition? Naam. I said, Mashi, I want it. Well, that's ijab and qubul. How much is it? It's this. Okay, I'm going to, please send it to me. Or hold it, I'll come and get it next week. That's an accepted form of communication. So the upshot is that there's nothing wrong with buying and selling things on the internet. As a matter of fact, it's the normal thing nowadays. Now we know why it's okay, because we have the threads from the classical Islamic law that allow that kind of transaction to take place. And we know that there are a couple of hoops of verification that need to take place in order to make that transaction Sharia compliant. And therefore, and one little trick is, if when you get stuck, is this verifying enough or not? Ask yourself, well, what happens if that was evidence in a court situation? If you went to the court with that, would the judge accept that as evidence or not? If they don't accept it as evidence, then you know that has not reached the threshold of the Sharia. If it's accepted as evidence, then it's accepted in the Sharia, or it's dubious. And even though there are some differences of opinion amongst the madhahib, in this case it's really inconsequential, because they're all united on the basic theory behind it. Wallahu ta'ala a'la wa a'lam, wa sallallahu ala sayyidina wa mawlana Muhammad wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa sallam. So in today's class, we talked about the internet, the rise of the internet, the proliferation of the internet, and using the internet for commerce, buying and selling products and or services. We learned that in the classical Islamic law, what we refer to as al-fiqh al-mawruth, the inherited fiqh, there is the room certainly for non-verbal communication to be considered legitimate communication. We looked at the basic section of buying and selling. We can also find this in the marriage and or divorce discussion, and in the discussion on the manumission of slaves. In all of those sections, you will find the literature in the longer books of fiqh, that is, with the permissibility of non-verbal communication. You can also send non-verbal communication. You can deputize, you can give a wakala to somebody, power of attorney, to communicate or to transact on your behalf. That would be an accepted form of non-verbal communication, etc. So in the classical fiqh, and based on the primary sources of the Quran and Sunnah, that's allowed. So therefore, when we carry over to the internet, our question is this non-verbal form of communication an accepted form of non-verbal communication today, in the custom of today? Many of these aspects are, and some of those aspects are not. In the modern world, when you buy things online or services online, I was saying that oftentimes there's now the added layer of verification. They will send you the verification to your email or to your phone to certify and to verify that you, that you are a human, and that you want to buy this service and go through. If you go through that steps, then that's considered a legitimate trade, a legitimate transaction. There's nothing haram in that. Unfortunately, identity theft happens all the time, and there are consumer protections, hopefully, when it comes to those type of things. But in general, these are accepted forms of modern communication. One thing that I added, hopefully is helpful, is that when you want to look at modern transactions, it helps by first pausing on the fiqh of it and just trying to understand the modern transaction as it is, its ins and outs. Then after that, looking at the fiqh and looking at the theory behind the fiqh. And then the third thing is to place those two together. If you don't do it in that order, oftentimes you enter into the modern discussion bias. And if you do that, you can make a lot of mistakes, which is why there's a lot of differences of opinion in the modern world on some of these questions. That's enough for today. Walhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. Wa sallallahu ala Sayyidina Mawlana Muhammad wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa sallam.